Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the latest PvE event that's been added to EVE Online, the Guardians Gala. This is basically the EVE Online version of a Valentine's Day celebration, which kind of celebrates the partnership between the Serpentis and Angel Cartel in the form of the Guardian Angels, which is effectively a contracting group of the Angel Cartel that works to protect the Serpentis Cartel's drug-dealing operations. But outside of the lore rationale for this occurring in the first place, the actual mechanics of the event are pretty similar to what we've seen in the previous couple that have been added since around the end of last year, adding new time-limited PvE events all over the cluster, however trying to specifically funnel you into one area of space or another, in this case, wormholes. Given that, the ship that I ended up deciding to use for this event was the Tengu, both because it gets a lot of bonuses to scanning, which makes moving around wormholes easier, and also because you can make it a CovOps fit, which just makes travelling around dangerous space like wormholes a lot easier to begin with. Plus its long history of being one of, if not the best PvE ships, depending on the specific meta, didn't really hurt. This is the fit I ended up deciding to use, and I'll also put the text version of it in the description below. As you can see, it's a pretty simple high tank heavy assault missile Tengu fit, with the only thing that's particularly blingy on it being that Pith C large shield booster, but we'll get to why that's necessary later on in the video. The only thing that I'd change about this, having gone through the sites a couple of times now, is that 10MN can probably be replaced with either an application module, or maybe even some extra tank or cap depending on your skills. Because you basically have no hope of using sig tanking to mitigate damage, or ability to really control range at all as the PvE player in this site. And we'll get onto why that is again later in the video. Now, after a quick test run in HiSec just to make sure everything was functioning as it should be and I hadn't completely cocked up the fit, I jumped right into wormholes and ran into the first mistake that I need to warn you about, which is, for the love of God, make sure you bring enough ammo, because these sites will absolutely drain you dry of it if you're not careful, and running out of ammo basically always kills you. Because not only do most of the ships have some form of either scram or point, but CCP also remembered to add the correct scram effects to these NPCs, so you can't even use a mobile micro jump drive deployable to yeet yourself out of there like you can in some of the previous sites. Which led to me having to eject from my Tengu and leave it for dead, which is a huge embarrassment, but you know, it makes for a funny joke in this video at least. Anyway, so after you find a VIP site somewhere in the depths of wormholes and warp to it, the first spawn will land almost immediately, and it should be noted that these spawns are completely randomized and can have pretty much any mix of threats within the spawn table, with the exception of having more than one logistics ship. I've not seen that happen yet, but I have seen things like 4 Taloses or 2 Vindicators, 1 Macario land on grid, and those things can really test the tank of non-optimal ships. So you can't really be given a full priority list for what to shoot in one of these sites, which in my opinion is pretty cool. It keeps you on your toes throughout the whole thing. But in general, what you should be looking to do is to clear off the frigates first, because the larger ships, specifically the battleships, seem to trigger a timer when they're killed, after which the next wave will warp in, no matter if you've completed the ships from that previous wave or not. And you really do not want to be in a position where you're fighting multiple remaining waves at once, because those small ships still have a lot of DPS and a lot of control, more to the point. Some of the things like Dramiels contain newts, the Daredevil has a 90% web, and oh my god, the bombers do a lot of damage as well. The only real exception there is you probably want to make sure that you kill the tier 3 battle cruisers, so the Taloses and the Tornadoes, relatively early on in pretty much every wave, because those things do a lot of damage and they die very quickly, at least to this fit. So by killing them early you can save a lot of pressure on your capacitor, as you're just not having to cycle your shield booster as much. Skipping along to a later wave in the site, you can see some of the more dangerous support cruisers start to spawn, with an Execura and a couple of Hugins here. And you want to kill the Execura or its T2 counterpart, the Aneros, pretty much immediately as soon as it lands on grid, because you are not going to be able to kill anything else until it is dead. This thing pumps out so many reps on other targets, which is whoever you're shooting at, that it effectively just acts as a plate for the rest of the site. You need to be able to recognize that those things are on grid and deal with them instantly, or you're just going to waste a ton of shots. Also here you can see that my speed is capped at around 20 meters a second because of the sheer volume of webs that's put on me. And that can be even worse if you end up with a heavy Vigilant, Vindicator, or Daredevil spawn, as those have 90% power webs, just like player Vigilant, Vindicators, or Daredevils. But unlike those ships, the Hugins and also the Lachesis can warp out and then walk back to the site if you're not in range of them. And that means that they can, if you're kiting at 120, 150, even 200 kilometers, simply ping off, walk back down to you, and web and point you. And that is going to be a huge problem if you're just trying to range tank these sites, because they will hold you there until whatever DPS is left in the site catches up to you. And also if you're trying to snipe them, you're going to really struggle to apply to these ships in the first place. What this means for you practically is no matter what ship you decide to bring, you're going to need to be able to beat this site at its own game, which is a very close range sub 30 kilometers brawl, because if you aren't prepared to deal with that, they will force you into it and you will die. Beyond that though, as long as you're running the site in a relatively well fit ship with a lot of tank and with good application to small ships, the site can actually start to lead to a false sense of security, especially as you start to get used to the tempo of when things are spawning and what's going on and what ships you need to shoot first. And my advice to you there is don't, because otherwise what will happen to you will happen to me. Here I was just casually checking Reddit as the wave started to end and I was just chewing my way through some Vindicators. And then the boss of the fight actually spawned before I was done finishing off the last of the battleships in this wave. And oh boy, does this thing not fuck about. As you can see, just 2 shots from it puts me deep into shields, and the nuke pressure that it puts out is not to be trifled with. In fact, I think this thing is statted pretty close to what a player Macarial is statted out to be, although without any particularly good tank mods, and it doesn't have an active tank, which is a complete blessing. But this is the point at which that Pitham C shield booster goes from a luxury that helps you just take the fight relatively easily to something that is pretty much necessary if you want to survive. Because as you can see, I needed not only that, but some 7% drugs that I'd picked up off a wreck, and a blue pill to even have a hope of making it through this fight before the Macarial actually ended up draining all of my capacitor. This is one of the most intense solo 1v1 PvE fights I've ever had in EVE. It felt like something that was even more difficult than a burner mission, because at least in a burner mission I had some sort of guide to follow. Here I was just winging it, and I was really worried I was going to die to this thing and have yet another embarrassing lost mail to show you guys, but fortunately, as you can see, I managed to just about pull it out. Still, this fight is incredibly tough and really interesting, and I feel like everyone should try and give it a go with their own personal PvE ship fit. I'm sure there's better ways of approaching it than this ham Tengu, but this was just really fun. Like, this actually almost gave me the PvP shakes. Not quite, but very close to it. I mean, how many PvE fights do you get into where you need to actually overheat? That's the real question, and for me, pretty much none before this. In total, after running 3 of these sites in a row, it ended up taking me about 35 minutes per site on average, and each site got me around 100 million if you average out the loot total, as I got 2 low-grade Savior implant blueprints, and a bunch of Overseer effects and general bounties. which means that if you're lucky and find a couple of wormholes in a row that do have VIP sites, you're going to be looking at 150 million ISK an hour or so. Which isn't fantastic, but it certainly is really, really good income just for someone who's day tripping and not setting up a whole dread farming operation. Before I wrap up this video though, I do want to give a shout out to a survey that PippinZA is running. He's an IRL data scientist and he's looking to try and help CCP collect some better feedback for their new releases. Specifically, he's looking at the ore mining general economy changes that are coming in the next couple of weeks that I talked about in my video on Sunday. So I'll leave a link to that in the comments below and in the description, and I'd really appreciate it if some of you guys could go through and check out that survey. I'm sure it'd mean a lot to him, and, hopefully it'll help CCP. Anyway, it's been wonderful having you, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to our Crassuses. Pinche Infidel from Old School, Brood from Triumvirate, Zolka Lando, and Jessica, as well as to my other $5 and above patrons in January Valentine, Ketzark Odin, Big Bada Boom, Zar, Dunk Dinkle, Miss Moses, Rafal Dordiens, Kem, and the Ashfell Federation. If you want to join them in supporting the channel directly, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or if you'd like, just share this video with some other people who you think might enjoy it, because advertising is the best thing you can possibly give me. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.